Professor Aris Thorne's study was a monument to organized chaos. Stacks of ancient scrolls teetered precariously beside digital tablets. Globe models from every era jostled for space on overcrowded shelves, and the air itself seemed thick with the dust of forgotten centuries. At the heart of this historical maelstrom sat Aris, a man whose silver hair often matched the wild disarray of his surroundings, peering intently at a contraption that resembled a polished brass telescope mounted on a gyroscopic base. Its intricate clockwork gleamed, catching the limited light filtering through the grimy window panes. "Elara, my dear girl, are you quite ready?" Aris's voice, a gravelly baritone softened by years of lecturing and quiet contemplation, echoed slightly in the room. He turned, his spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, revealing eyes that sparkled with an almost childlike wonder. Elara Vance, ever the antithesis to Aris's endearing disavowalment, stood beside a meticulously organized table, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She double-checked a series of atmospheric readings on a sleek handheld device. "Ready as I'll ever be, Professor. All parameters stable, temporal flux readings nominal. Though I still find it astounding how we managed to observe these events without disrupting the delicate fabric of causality." Her tone held a hint of awe, carefully tempered by her usual scientific skepticism. Aris chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Ah, the beauty of the chronoscope, Elara. It doesn't send us back, not in the corporeal sense. It merely opens a window, a perfect, undetectable aperture into the past. We are but silent witnesses, phantoms in the annals of time, permitted to breathe the air of yesteryear without leaving so much as a ripple." He gestured grandly towards the chronoscope, which hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within the ancient floorboards. "Imagine, Elara, to truly see the moments that spun the world on a new axis, to witness the nascent flicker of an idea become a raging inferno of change." Elara smiled, a rare, gentle curve of her lips. Despite Aris's theatricality, his passion was infectious, and it was precisely why she, a stickler for logic and verifiable facts, found his work so captivating. "And today's inaugural journey?" she prompted, placing her device back on the table with precise care. Aris's eyes gleamed with mischief and profound excitement. "Indeed, for our very first grand observation, we must choose something truly foundational. Not a battle, not the fall of an empire, but a quiet revolution, a revolution of thought." He leaned closer to the chronoscope, adjusting a dial with the reverence of a priest tending a sacred artifact. "Imagine a world where knowledge is confined, painstakingly copied by hand, accessible only to the elite. A world where ideas spread at a snail's pace, if at all. Then imagine a single invention that shatters those chains, democratizing wisdom, empowering the masses, and igniting the very fires of the Renaissance and Reformation." Elara's eyes widened slightly, a sudden understanding dawning. "The printing press." "Precisely, my dear," Aris exclaimed, clapping his softly, a small cloud of dust puffing from an adjacent stack of books. "Johannes Gutenberg and his magnificent movable type. We are going to witness, Elara, the birth of mass communication, the moment when ink met paper in a way that would forever alter human destiny. We'll observe the intricate details, the struggles, the sheer audacity of this innovation in mid-15th century Mainz." He pulled a small lever on the chronoscope, and the brass mechanisms within began to whir with a more pronounced energy. Gears engaged, springs tightened, and a faint, almost holographic shimmer began to coalesce within the viewing aperture, directly ahead of them. The light intensified, taking on a soft, ethereal glow, like moonlight on a distant, unseen ocean. "Stand ready, Elara," Aris said, his voice now hushed with a profound sense of anticipation. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze fixed on the unfolding temporal window. "We are about to step into a moment that redefined humanity's relationship with knowledge. Observe everything, absorb it all. For this, my dear, is where the modern world truly begins." He gestured for her to look into the shimmering vortex, the faint scent of
At the heart of the organized chaos, Professor Aris Thorne himself presided, a figure as ancient and intriguing as the artifacts that surrounded him. He sat hunched over a heavy oak desk, spectacles perched precariously on his nose, a magnifying glass held steadily over what appeared to be a shard of petrified wood, intricately carved with symbols no known civilization had ever documented. His silvery hair, usually a wild halo, was flattened slightly where he had habitually run his hand through it in deep concentration. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and dust, was occasionally punctuated by the soft whirring of a modern 3D scanner, humming quietly in the corner, contrasting starkly with the antiquity it sought to record. A soft knock echoed through the study's heavy oak door, startling Aris slightly. He looked up, blinking, his eyes, sharp and intelligent behind thick lenses, slowly refocusing on the present. "Ah, Elara, come in," he boomed, his voice a surprising resonance from his slight frame. Elara Vance, his most promising doctoral student, stepped into the room. She was a whirlwind of calm efficiency, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her expression a careful balance of respect and eager curiosity. Unlike the professor, she was always impeccably organized, her digital tablet clutched firmly in one hand. "Professor Thorne, good morning," she greeted, navigating the narrow pathways between towering bookstacks with practice ease. "You asked to see me about a new development?" Aris's face lit up, a boyish excitement overcoming his scholarly demeanor. He gestured wildly towards the desk, almost knocking over a stack of papyrus scrolls. "Development, my dear Elara, it's a revelation, a paradigm shift. For years we've dismissed the legends, the whispers, the apocryphal tales surrounding the collapse of the great Asmaran Empire. Standard historical accounts attributed to internal strife, resource depletion, perhaps a well-timed barbarian invasion. Predictable, mundane even," he scoffed, as if finding standard history personally offensive. Elara raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "And you found something to suggest otherwise, I presume?" "Precisely," Aris leaned back, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He picked up the carved wood shard, handling it with reverence. "This, my dear, arrived this morning from a dig site in the remote Asmaran foothills. Carbon dating puts it centuries before the conventional timeline of their collapse. And these symbols," he pushed the magnifying glass towards Elara, "they match nothing in the Asmaran scriptorium, yet they possess an undeniable structural complexity, almost technological." Elara peered closer at the intricate carvings. They seemed to pulse with an energeometry unlike any ancient art she had ever studied. "Are you suggesting a precursor civilization, Professor?" "More than that, Elara, far more," Aris said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "The accompanying archaeological report detailed unusual magnetic anomalies surrounding its discovery, and the legend in the local village, dismissed by scholars as mere folklore, speaks of celestial architects and a skyfall that changed the world. I believe we have been looking at the wrong cause for the Asmaran demise, and in doing so have missed one of the most profound non-human interventions in human history. This isn't just a new artifact, it's a key to understanding a truly world-altering event that has been deliberately or accidentally buried beneath centuries of conventional wisdom." He looked at her, his expression serious. "This changes everything." What appeared to be an impossibly old, delicate parchment, its frayed, tea-colored vellum barely held form. Under the professor's unwavering gaze, illuminated by his desk lamp, intricate lines and faded script emerged. It wasn't a conventional map, but a mosaic of symbols, astronomical alignments, and fragmented cartographic details, interwoven with a script defying immediate translation. Thorne's breath hitched softly. For weeks, he'd meticulously pieced together parchment fragments from disparate collections. Each new piece whispered from the past, a clue rewriting epochs. He traced a faded spiral within a broken circle, a motif linked to his theory of forgotten global influence. "Remarkable," he murmured, his gravelly voice a whisper. "Absolutely remarkable." Just then, rhythmic tapping echoed from the study door. Thorne, startled, blinked, lowering his magnifying glass, his eyes still holding discovery's gleam. "Enter, Elara," he called out, his voice gruffer, quickly overshadowed by anticipation. The heavy, carved door creaked open, admitting Elara Vance, a young woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Her dark hair, usually bunned, had rebellious strands. She carried a steaming mug of Earl Grey and a slim journal, its aroma a counterpoint to dusty books. Navigating the towering stacks, she greeted, "Professor, I have something regarding the Sumerian cuneiform you asked me to cross-reference." Thorne grunted, profoundly eager. He gestured vaguely at the chaos. "Place it anywhere, child. But first, look. I believe this is it, Elara. The missing link. The connection between the Bronze Age collapse and the sudden emergence of highly advanced navigational techniques in civilizations separated by vast oceans." Elara's usually composed eyes widened as she caught sight of the parchment under the lamp. She set down the tea and journal on a less cluttered corner, leaning closer. The study air, thick with history, hummed with academic excitement. She peered over his shoulder, brow furrowing. Could it be what I think it is, Professor? She whispered, awe in her voice. A fragment of the Chronos Navigandi. Thorne's rare smile spread across his face, crinkling his eyes. Precisely, my dear. The legendary Navigator's Chronicle, long dismissed as myth. And I believe I've just deciphered the first truly legible line. He pointed with a trembling finger to a series of glyphs. It reads, "When the sky bled, the waters rose, and the stars guided the survivors to new shores." The implications hung heavy, connecting natural disasters to human migration and technological leaps, defying current historical understanding. Elara looked from the parchment to Thorne, her mind racing with ramifications. This wasn't just a curiosity, it was a historical bombshell. Astronomical alignments that seem to chart not stars, but moments of profound, forgotten history. The professor's finger, gnarled with age and stained faintly with ink, traced a particularly complex constellation of symbols at the parchment's heart. It wasn't just a record of celestial bodies, he realized with a jolt that sent a tremor through his hunched frame. It was a cosmic calendar, meticulously designed to pinpoint events of world-altering significance. Each intricate line, each faded glyph, whispered of a wisdom long buried, a monumental understanding of the universe's dance and its impact on the terrestrial realm. Aris leaned back, pushing his spectacles up his nose to rub his tired eyes. The air in the study, already thick with the scent of old paper and leather, now seemed to hum with the energy of a nascent discovery. This wasn't merely a historical document. It was a key. A key to what, he wasn't yet certain, but the familiar thrill of an imminent breakthrough thrummed in his veins. The parchment detailed cycles, not just of seasons or empires, but of cataclysms and renaissances, moments when the very fabric of human civilization was irrevocably reshaped, often without any clear, documented cause in conventional history. "Remarkable," Aris murmured, his voice a dry rasp in the quiet room. "Absolutely extraordinary." A soft rap on the open study door broke his solitude. Aris looked up, a faint scowl momentarily marring his expression, before softening as a young woman stepped tentatively into the doorway. Elara Vance, his most brilliant and often exasperating doctoral student, carried a steaming mug of Ceylon tea, his preferred evening brew, and a stack of recently digitized texts. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately locked onto the ancient parchment spread across his desk. "Professor, I thought you might appreciate this," Elara said, setting the tea carefully beside a teetering pile of Etruscan pottery shards. Her gaze lingered on the parchment, a curious frown forming on her brow. "What have you unearthed now? It looks even older than the Sumerian tablets you were wrestling with last week." Aris chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Elara, my dear, you arrive at a most opportune or perhaps inopportune moment, depending on your threshold for paradigm shifts." He gestured for her to come closer, his hand shaking slightly with excitement. "This, my perceptive scholar, is not merely old. It is a testament, a blueprint of cosmic intervention in human affairs, if I am not entirely mistaken." Elara approached, her scholarly curiosity overriding her usual reserved demeanor. She cared over her shoulder, her brow furrowing deeper as she absorbed the complex imagery. "Cosmic intervention? Are we talking about ancient aliens again, Professor? Because Professor Albright down the hall is still convinced you're trying to prove the moon landing was faked by a rogue sect of Atlanteans." Aris waved a dismissive hand. "Albright is a delightful Luddite with a penchant for sensationalism. No, Elara, nothing so pedestrian. This parchment, I believe, is a celestial ledger, charting the moments when astronomical phenomena coincided with, or perhaps even triggered, pivotal events on Earth. Events that changed the world forever, yet whose true catalysts remain shrouded in mystery." He pointed to a section of symbols. "Observe this cluster here. It appears to correspond with a period that conventional archaeology attributes to the sudden, inexplicable collapse of several flourishing Bronze Age civilizations. Coincidence? Perhaps, but these symbols suggest something far more profound." Aris leaned in, her skepticism slowly giving way to awe as she began to recognize patterns within the ancient script, patterns that resonated with long-forgotten astronomical charts she had studied. If what you're suggesting is true, Professor, then this isn't just history. It's a complete rewriting of it. Celestial bodies, but a deeply interwoven tapestry of human civilization's most pivotal, often veiled, turning points. His finger, gnarled with age and stained faintly with ink, paused over a cluster of markings that shimmered, almost imperceptibly, in the lamplight. This wasn't merely an astronomical chart. It was a temporal almanac, a grand ledger of cause and effect, written by an unknown hand, detailing moments when the very fabric of existence shifted. Aris Thorne felt a familiar, exhilarating chill crawl up his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced since discovering the lost codex of Alexandria's cartographers. The parchment pulsed with a silent energy, whispering secrets across millennia. He adjusted his spectacles, bringing his eyes even closer to the delicate vellum. The symbols resolved further, a stylized comet intersecting with what looked like an early agricultural implement, followed by a sequence of glyphs that Aris's prodigious memory instantly connected to the rise of early urban centers in Mesopotamia. It wasn't a narrative, but a series of interconnected events, each a tiny thread in the vast, complex loom of human history. The forgotten history wasn't forgotten because it was minor. It was forgotten because its true significance, its ripple effect across centuries, had been obscured or deliberately hidden. This parchment, Aris realized with a jolt that threatened to dislodge his spectacles, didn't just record history, it revealed its secret architecture. A faint rap on the study door broke his intense concentration, causing him to jump slightly, nearly knocking over a stack of Sumerian clay tablets. "Professor Thorne, may I come in?" a clear, youthful voice inquired. Aris blinked, his eyes slowly adjusting from the micro-world of the parchment to the dusty reality of his study. "Ah, Leo! Come in, my boy, come in." The door creaked open, admitting a slender young man with intelligent, observant eyes and a perpetually rumpled tweed jacket, Leo Maxwell, Aris's brightest and most tenacious research assistant. Leo took in the scene, the disheveled professor, the glowing parchment, the scent of old paper and frantic discovery hanging heavy in the air. "Apologies for the interruption, Professor, but you asked me to cross-reference the pre-dynastic Egyptian papyri with the early Minoan tablets regarding their agricultural advancements, and I believe I found something significant in the symbols for grain storage that might imply an earlier shared influence." Leo trailed off, his gaze drawn irresistibly to the parchment under Aris's hand. "Is that new?" Aris allowed a delighted, almost manic chuckle. "New, Leo? My dear boy, this is older than new. It's foundational. Come closer, but gently, for goodness sake, gently. This isn't merely a map of the stars, as I initially thought, nor is it simply a record of celestial phenomena." He gestured with a trembling hand at the parchment. "This, Leo, is a blueprint of destiny, a chronological tapestry of the moments when human decisions, often seemingly small or isolated, irrevocably reshaped the world. Look here." He pointed a gnarled finger at the parchment's heart. "This cluster of symbols, I believe it details not just an event, but the precise mechanism by which an entire era was unwittingly forged. A forgotten genesis, perhaps, whose echoes still resonate in our modern societies, yet its source remains utterly unrecognized." His voice dropped to a near whisper, filled with awe and a touch of professional dread. "It speaks of a singular, devastating revelation that occurred at the dawn of civilization, a revelation so profound it was carefully, painstakingly erased from collective memory, but inscribed here, for those with eyes to see." This wasn't merely an ordinary artifact or a historical document. It was a living chronicle, whispering secrets across millennia. The cluster of markings under his aged finger didn't just shimmer with an ephemeral light. They pulsed, a faint, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to resonate deep within the oak of his desk, and perhaps even within the ancient bones of Professor Thorne himself. He leaned closer, his breath misting the fragile vellum, his eyes, magnified by his spectacles, scrutinizing the dance of light and shadow. He had spent decades, a lifetime even, delving into the forgotten corners of human civilization, piecing together fragments of lost knowledge. He had always believed in a grand underlying pattern to history, a series of dominoes unseen by conventional historians, whose fall irrevocably altered the course of empires, philosophies, and human destiny. This parchment, he now understood with a jolt that coursed through his entire being, was the master blueprint. It didn't just record these turning points, it hinted at the mechanisms behind them, the subtle shifts in cosmic alignment, the convergence of human will and extraordinary circumstance that forged reality. The shimmering cluster resolved into a complex constellation of glyphs surrounding a central, brighter sigil. It resembled a coiled serpent swallowing its own tail, an Ouroboros, but instead of a plain circle, the serpent's body was segmented, each segment containing a minute, almost microscopic etching. With a practiced hand, Aris adjusted a specialized loop hanging on a chain around his neck, bringing the minute details into sharper focus. He gasped, a sound barely audible above the gentle hum of his ancient computer server in the corner. The etchings weren't abstract, they were miniature, exquisitely detailed depictions of historical events, each subtly distorted, seen from an unfamiliar angle. One segment showed what appeared to be the Library of Alexandria, not burning from external forces, but decaying from within, its scrolls turning to dust on their shelves, seemingly unread. Another depicted the construction of the Great Pyramid, but instead of thousands of laborers, a handful of robed figures stood before colossal blocks, seemingly moving them with a collective unseen force. These weren't the narratives history books presented, they were the untold stories, the veiled truths that reshaped epochs. The Ouroboros, Aris realized, represented the cyclical nature of these veiled turning points, each event a catalyst for the next, perpetually feeding into the grand tapestry of human experience. The bright central sigil, however, was different. It didn't depict an event, but a symbol he recognized from only the most esoteric, forbidden texts, the Nexus Prime. It was said to be a point in time, not a place, where all threads of possibility converged, a moment when the future was most malleable, most susceptible to intentional redirection. And the markings around that sigil were vibrating with an unprecedented intensity, almost glowing. They pointed to a convergence, a coming event, not a past one. Aris's mind raced, connecting the dots of his lifelong research. He had always dismissed the legends of Nexus Prime as mythical conjecture, but here it was, illuminated on a document far older than any written history. It implied that the turning points of history weren't merely accidental convergences, but perhaps, at times, orchestrated, and the parchment was now actively pointing to a future convergence. A sudden sharp knock on a study door startled him, shattering the profound silence. He had been so lost in his discovery, he hadn't noticed the changing light outside, or the approach of his only regular visitor. He pulled his spectacles down to the tip of his nose, his eyes, now wide with a mixture of wonder and a nascent urgency, focused on the door. He knew who it would be. Only one person was tenacious enough to brave his organized chaos without a formal invitation, and perceptive enough to sense when he was on the precipice of a breakthrough. Dr. Lena Hansen. He needed her unique blend of archaeological expertise and skeptical pragmatism now more than ever. The parchment had revealed a secret too profound to bear alone, a secret that hinted at not just understanding history, but perhaps influencing it. The faint, rhythmic thrumming deep within the parchment was no longer faint. It surged, a palpable hum vibrating through the ancient oak desk, up Professor Thorne's gnarled fingers, settling with an insistent buzz in his very bones. The air in the study, thick with the scent of aged paper and leather, now crackled with unseen energy, raising fine hairs on his forearms. The lamplight, usually a steady, warm glow, flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows across crammed shelves, making globes spin imperceptibly. This wasn't a mere electrical anomaly. It was the parchment itself, singing a millennia-old song, building to a crescendo. The cluster of markings which had pulsed before now glowed with an internal cool blue light spreading across the delicate vellum, illuminating previously invisible symbols. Lines of script, indecipherable moments ago, seemed to breathe, shifting with a fluidity that defied their age. "Impossible," he murmured, his voice a dry whisper. He had dedicated his life to uncovering history's veiled truths, but never before had an artifact presented such raw, living power. This wasn't merely a record, it was an active conduit, a window straining to open. The blue light intensified, creating an ethereal aura around the parchment. Within its luminous expanse, symbols coalesced, forming fleeting, almost holographic images above the vellum. He saw glimpses, a colossal structure half buried in sand, a celestial alignment of startling precision, stars blazing brighter than modern telescopes could capture, ancient ships, sails taut against a furious, star-dusted sky. Each image flashed and faded, too quick to grasp, yet leaving an indelible impression of immense scale and profound significance. The thrumming grew louder, a deep bass note vibrating through the floorboards, causing atlases to topple, scattering dust and maps. The sheer energy radiating from the parchment was overwhelming. His heart pounded with the intoxicating thrill of discovery, a realization that he was on the precipice of something that would redefine humanity's understanding of its past. This felt like the genesis point for all change. Just as the blue light reached its zenith, momentarily blinding him, a sudden, sharp rap echoed. The heavy oak door to his study creaked open slowly, revealing a figure silhouetted against the softer light of the hallway. "Professor Thorne, are you all right? I felt a tremor. Your lights are flickering spectacularly." It was Elara Vance, his most promising doctoral student. Her composure was ruffled by concern and bewildered curiosity. Her dark, intelligent eyes, usually assessing historical data on a screen, now darted around the pulsing, strangely lit study, taking in the fallen books, erratic lamplight, and most importantly, the luminous, thrumming parchment that held the professor utterly spellbound. A tablet clutched in her hand seemed an anachronism in this unfolding, ancient magic. Professor Thorne, still bathed in the parchment's unearthly glow, barely registered her presence. His gaze was fixed on a new image emerging with startling clarity above the vellum, a vast swirling vortex of cosmic dust and light. At its center, a single, impossibly bright star bloomed into existence, radiating a wave of energy that seemed to ripple through time itself. "Elara," he rasped, his voice hoarse with awe. "You won't believe what's happening." The air in the study, already thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten wisdom, now crackled with an almost unbearable energy. The rhythmic thrumming from the parchment had reached a fever pitch, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated not just in Professor Thorne's bones, but in every antique volume, every fragile scroll, every very atom of the room. A soft, otherworldly light began to emanate from the parchment itself, growing swiftly in intensity. It wasn't the harsh glow of electricity, but a warm, pulsating luminescence, the color of deep amber and ancient gold that chased away the shadows clinging to the towering bookshelves. Professor Thorne, rooted to his seat, felt a strange lightness take hold of him, a sensation akin to gravity loosening its grip. His spectacles had slipped to the tip of his nose, forgotten, as his wide, awe-struck eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before him. The intricate lines and faded script on the parchment no longer seemed two-dimensional. They began to lift, shimmering threads of light weaving themselves into ethereal three-dimensional forms above the desk. Astronomical alignments spiraled upwards, coalescing into miniature glowing constellations that danced in the charged air. Symbols flared, then dissolved, replaced by fleeting, almost subliminal images. A stone pyramid rising against a desert sky, a Viking longship cresting a stormy wave, the intricate gears of an early printing press whirring to life. This was it, the culmination of a lifetime's unwavering dedication, of whispers from the past he chased through dusty archives and crumbling ruins. The living chronicle was indeed living, breathing, and now showing. He instinctively reached out, his gnarled fingers trembling, not with fear, but with a profound sense of anticipation, toward the swirling vortex of light and image that now hung directly above the ancient vellum. As his fingertips approached, the light intensified further, becoming a dazzling, kaleidoscopic tunnel that seemed to stretch into infinite depth. A faint, distant sound began to reach him, not a singular noise, but a symphony of echoes, the distant clash of steel, the murmur of ancient marketplaces, the hushed reverence of a cathedral choir, all mingling into a single overwhelming sonic tapestry. Just as his fingertips brushed the shimmering threshold, and a powerful, inexplicable pull began to tug at his very essence, the heavy oak door to the study burst open with a resounding thud. "Professor Thorne, what in the—" Leo Maxwell, Professor Thorne's young research assistant, stood framed in the doorway, his usually neat hair disheveled, his eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and utter disbelief. He had been downstairs, poring over digital scans of another obscure text, when the building itself had begun to hum, and an increasingly bright golden light had started to leak from under the professor's study door. He'd rushed upstairs, bracing himself for some antique electrical fault or an accidentally started fire, but nothing in his academic training or modern understanding could have prepared him for this. The sight that greeted him was beyond comprehension. Professor Thorne, bathed in an ethereal, pulsating golden light, his face a mask of wonder, was reaching into what appeared to be a swirling nebula of light above his desk. The parchment beneath it glowed like a miniature sun, and the air thrummed with a power that made Leo's teeth ache. The entire study, with its jumbled history, seemed to be vibrating on the precipice of another dimension. Leo could feel the distinct echoes of distant voices and places, a chorus of humanity's past, now vividly present, resonating throughout the room. He gasped, utterly speechless, as the professor's hand, now fully enveloped in the shimmering light, seemed to vanish limb by limb into the swirling historical vortex. Every ancient artifact, every glass pane in the tall windows, every fiber of the professor's being. The air itself became a living thing, swirling and churning, picking up scrolls from their precarious perches and sending them dancing in a sudden, unseen current. Sparks of static electricity, like tiny startled fireflies, began to flicker and snap around the exposed metal of the shelves, around the antique light fixtures, and most intensely, around the heavy oak desk where Professor Thorne still sat, rooted to the spot by a force beyond his understanding. The parchment, the source of this tempestuous energy, no longer merely thrummed. It radiated an incandescent white light, so brilliant it forced Aris to squint, even through his thick spectacles. The intricate lines and faded script, moments ago a subtle mosaic of forgotten history, now glowed with an impossible clarity, each symbol pulsing with an inner life. Then, with a soft tearing sound that seemed to rend not just the air, but the very fabric of time, the parchment began to lift from the desk. It floated upwards, unfurling itself further, revealing even more complex and vibrant constellations of markings. As it ascended, the light intensified, coalescing into a swirling vortex above the ancient vellum. It was a doorway, not of wood or stone, but of pure, shimmering energy, reflecting hues of deep indigo, emerald green, and molten gold. A low, resonant hum, now a choir of untold ages, emanated from its depths, pulling at Aris with an irresistible, ethereal current. He felt a profound sense of decompression, as if the weight of the world, of his own existence, was being gently lifted, stretched, and then reformed. His vision blurred, the familiar chaos of his study dissolving into a maelstrom of color and sound. He was falling, yet rising, expanding, yet condensing. A kaleidoscope of images flashed before his eyes, fleeting glimpses of vast, sun-drenched deserts, the shadowy interiors of colossal, impossible libraries, the frantic construction of monuments that defy earthly physics, the hushed awe of masked figures gathered under alien stars. He tasted dust, felt the oppressive heat of a long-dead sun, heard the murmur of languages lost to the mists of time. He was not just witnessing history, he was touching it, becoming part of its raw, pulsating memory. Just as the sensation reached its zenith, a deafening crack echoed through the study. The antique wooden door, already stressed by the energy, splintered violently inward, flung open by an urgent hand. Standing silhouetted against the dimmer light of the hallway, eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and disbelief, was Dr. Lena Petrova, Professor Thorne's brilliant young protege. She had rushed in, having heard the escalating cacosity from her own nearby office, the shattering glass, the electrical snaps, and that impossible growing hum. Her gaze, sharp and perceptive even in shock, swept across the devastated study, past the debris of shattered lamps and flung books, and landed upon the luminous vortex above the professor's desk, and then on Professor Aris Thorne himself. He was no longer hunched over the desk. He was suspended, limbs slightly splayed, a faint aura of shimmering light surrounding him, his face a mask of profound wonder and barely contained terror. His eyes, though fixed on something far beyond the physical confines of the room, held a light she had never seen before. The light of a man who was quite literally standing on the threshold of time itself. The scene before her was not just a scientific anomaly, it was a revelation, a raw, undeniable tear in the fabric of reality, and Professor Thorne was at its very heart. The air in the study, now a maelstrom of unseen forces, screamed. Sparks of static electricity arced violently between metal objects, the brass astrolabe, the iron sundial, the chronometer, igniting dust motes into ephemeral stars. Scrolls, no longer merely dancing, ripped free from shelves, their ancient pages fluttering like startled birds before disintegrating into wisps of historical confetti. A fragile Ming vase, a prized possession, lifted gently from its pedestal before shattering against the ceiling, its shards glinting briefly like diamonds before being swept away into the swirling vortex. The deep, resonant hum had escalated into a deafening roar, a primal sound that seemed to emanate not from the parchment alone, but from the very fabric of existence, vibrating through Professor Thorne's teeth, rattling his vision, threatening to tear him apart. Yet, amidst the terrifying cacophony, a strange serenity settled over him. He felt less like an observer and more like a conduit, an antenna tuning into a frequency that had lain dormant for millennia. His gnarled fingers, still gripping the desk with surprising strength, felt the ancient oak splintering beneath the intense vibrations, but he did not release his hold on the pulsating parchment, now blazing with an unearthly white light that seemed to pierce his very soul. The light intensified, no longer contained by the vellum's delicate edges. It surged upwards, forming a swirling vortex of pure, raw energy above the desk, casting chaotic shadows that danced like specters of forgotten ages across the chaotic study. Then, the overwhelming roar peaked, a crescendo that felt like the universe itself was exhaling. In that precise moment of unbearable pressure, a sudden frantic pounding on the study door, almost drowned out by the tempest, preceded its violent swing open, revealing a figure. Silhouetted against the dimmer, flickering light of the hallway stood Dr. Lena Petrova, Thorne's brilliant, if sometimes cynical, young research assistant. Her dark hair was disheveled, her lab coat askew, a mixture of alarm, stark disbelief, and scientific curiosity etched across her features. "Professor, what in the... By all that is sacred, are you all right?" Lena's voice, though sharp with concern, was utterly lost in the maelstrom. She stumbled forward, pushing the heavy door shut against the swirling chaos, her gaze immediately locking onto the professor, then to the incandescent parchment that pulsed at the heart of the storm. At that instant, the vortex above the parchment solidified. The brilliant white light softened, diffused, and began to coalesce into a shimmering three-dimensional image, holographic yet startlingly real. It wasn't a static picture, but a vibrant, living scene that unfolded before their astonished eyes. They stood no longer in the chaotic study, but on the precipice of a dusty, wind-swept plain, bathed in the ruddy, ancient light of a setting sun. Before them, figures, indistinct yet human, huddled around a crackling fire, their faces wrapped. One figure, distinguishable by an intricate headpiece woven from bone and sinew, meticulously carved a series of intricate symbols on a smooth stone tablet, pausing to examine his work with a furrowed brow, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Around him, others watched, a mixture of curiosity and dawning comprehension on their faces. It was a profound silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of an unknown creature, the very genesis of recorded language, the first conscious attempt to eternalize thought beyond fleeting breath. Thorne, tears streaming freely, not from fear but from wonder, could only whisper, hoarse with emotion, "The first mark, Lena, the very dawn of history as we know it." Lena, her scientific skepticism momentarily shattered by the sheer impossible reality before her, could only stare, her mouth agape, as the ancient world breathed and lived, projected into Aris Thorne's calming study. The deafening thrumming subsided to a gentle, almost benevolent hum, the swirling air calmed to a soft breeze, the fallen objects settled, unharmed. The parchment, though still glowing faintly, had opened a window not to a distant land, but to a distant time, revealing a pivotal moment that truly changed the world forever, forever etched in the annals of mankind's silent chronicle, now made vivid and tangible. This wasn't just history, it was a living, breathing memory, unfolding before them, awaiting their interpretation. The journey, Thorne realized, his gaze fixed on the nascent symbols, had only just begun.